Welcome, welcome. Yeah, we're 8 hours into this in-depth advanced spiritual workshop called Electrification and Etherization, Advanced Spiritual Awakening Topics. Today is our part 4, and the main topic of part 4 is spiritual identity. Now, we will clarify what that is. We're going to do a soft intro here into our part 4 by briefly reviewing the previous parts. So in part 1, we handled or discussed what it feels like to have these spiritual impulses in oneself, and what we experience as contradictions and challenges. In part 2, we discussed the spiritual impulse in society, which led us to look at some of these more recent spiritual developments that we're seeing, also the issues with it, how topics such as mind control and transhumanism might affect our human consciousness development. And finally, then in our last, in part 3, we discussed these spiritual vocabulary words, or most common spiritual questions. Yeah, we called this spiritual considerations, and we learned that there is a culminated wisdom of spiritual sciences if we look at it historically. So everything that we talk about here is not just something that I made up or that I have seen in the spiritual world due to my spiritual side. I have confirmed it through my spiritual side, but it is actually something that I have acquired through the study of this culminated wisdom of spiritual sciences. So this is something that we need to keep in mind here. Yeah, so there is something that is much more structured or much more planned, if you will. There's an order to things that when we are at the beginning of our spiritual awakening, we're not clearly seeing. Now, if we grew up in our different societies that have diverse sort of approaches to spirituality and religion, then we can see that depending on when these spiritual frameworks were developed in the world history, that they entail, for the most part, very similar practices but different goals. This is something that we discussed in part 3 because of their timeliness. So at specific times, if we assume that we are looking at a history here of 10,000 years of human development, this is something that we can trace back, and that we can verify through science, through archaeological, geological, and other sciences, okay, that tell us that these civilizations existed. There's some of them have transferred their wisdom through written word, most of them through oral traditions. But we'll see that at different times of human development, different things or different mastery goals, yeah, the goal to master this or that, all right, occurred according to the time that people were in. So this is a very important realization. I want to point this out for all of you, that when we look at ancient texts, it's very important to consider their developmental stage, their age, okay, like when these people, what their education level was, what the overall level of consciousness was, and so forth. So looking at um, our development here as a whole, all right, as humanity requires us to understand that there is a timely aspect to it. So each of these eras, each of these epochs brought in different accomplishments that we basically benefit from nowadays that we take for granted. We talked a little bit about this last time here in part 3. So basically, what I am hinting at is the stages of spiritual evolution so far. Yeah. So if we look at spiritual sciences, if we look at esoterica, if we look at sort of what we can learn from the culminated wisdom, spiritual wisdom that is out there that we can study, we see that there's an evolution that is taking place. And we'll learn a little bit about this today on other occasion in the parallel workshop series. Aspects or issues with spiritual awakening. I talked about this already, how these different civilizatory stages also brought in different accomplishments for us as humanity. We did brush on some questions about the afterlife and retrocausality. So retrocausality is a term that basically refers to time as we perceive it. And there is a lot of reason to believe that the way we perceive time here in 3D, since we don't actually have a proper sense that we've developed for this, might just be a mental construct. So what this means is basically that we can assume or at least investigate that reality is not as sequential as or linear as we perceive it as humans. Yeah, that time is rather simultaneous. Yeah, that past, present, and future exist simultaneously and therefore also affect one another. This is a big concept that needs to be understood for manifestation, but also for all questions in regards to what happens after we die. Yeah, and all that allows us to understand our true nature better. Who are we, and why we are here? And for this, we basically touch on these 3 subjects, or have been touching on these 3 subjects, namely what does etherization mean, what does electrification mean, and what does, what do our spiritual, or what role do our spiritual organs play in that? Do we all have them? How come we can't feel them, we can't use them, and etc. So those are all things that we didn't discuss, but we touched upon last time, and we're going to learn more about this today that will make it a bit more clear for us why the development of spiritual organs is an instrumental part here in this consideration of human consciousness evolution. Today's topic is spiritual identity. And yeah, I mean, I can ask you guys just to wake you up a little bit and to break the ice. What do you understand as spiritual identity? Yeah, what does this mean to you? I've sometimes used synonyms such as having a spiritual driver's license, or evolving out of the sort of spiritual baby stage into the teenage stage, something like that, for simplification. But what do you actually understand as a spiritual identity, just like where you're at right now? Okay, mind you, we're going to talk about this for the entire duration of this workshop. So this isn't about what you know, this is about how you feel about it, or how you understand it, maybe intuitively, or what comes up for you when you hear those words, spiritual identity. Who wants to share?
Jona, I'll jump in. This is Sheila.
Hi,
Hi.
Sheila.
So, when speaking of spiritual identity, like, if I can get myself past the religious part of hearing spiritualness, I've always felt like I've always had an understanding that I've had a spiritual history, like in my soul being, if you will. Like
Mm-hmm.
there was a part of me that came here before my body, like, you know what I mean? And I just kind of always had this, I don't know, intuitive inner knowing that I came from somewhere and I have experiences, right? And that what I'm doing here is living this life with experiences, and then I'm going to go into my next life, or where, like, it's just an
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
ongoing process. And so for me, that's what feels spiritual to me. It's the part of me that is more than a physical body.
Okay. And I like that. That's basically what I do all day long. Like a broken record. Yes.
Uh-huh. Right.
Yes. Thank you, Sheila. So, really, what you're saying is that you understand yourself not just as a physical body, you know that there is something, after that, there was maybe something before. Okay.
Hmm.
And that is something that you basically call the spirit being or the spiritual being of yourself, and in simple language you just call it the soul. Most
Hmm.
people just call the soul, actually, regardless of whether they believe in a higher power or not. But this experience that you just described, I mean, putting in mind that you've also spent a considerable amount of time already studying this, okay? But just in as simple as you uh, shared this here with us, is that under spiritual identity, you understand you understand your awareness of yourself as a spirit being,
Hmm.
yeah, as a spiritual identity. I mean, I
Right.
don't want to, I don't try to put words in your mouth, but I'm trying to like just put this together here for us so that I can use this later,
Hmm.
as a term or a phrase. So you understand that you're not just a body. Yeah, you understand that you also have something like a soul, and that is somehow evolving. I say somehow. Yeah, you didn't specify, but you
Hmm.
said something about coming back and refining it, working on things, getting better with time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
something
I
like that.
think that, yeah, I think that for me, like, if I was trying to I was trying to put myself in my very early beginning stages of when did I become aware of the me, the I, the inner part of me,
Uh-huh,
not
uh-huh.
just like me as a physical body. That's the part where, if I go all the way back to that, I've always felt that there, I didn't understand all of the workings of all of it. You know what I mean? Or how it works with this body and all of these things, which is why I'm here and doing these
Hmm.
things, right? but but that inner knowing just kind of always felt like it was there before, it's here now, and it'll still be when I'm physically not here.
I like that. This is literally where we ended part three, that it's a feeling and that it is something that
Hmm.
we actually share with almost all humans. Yeah, especially if, like when you talk to kids, when it's rather untainted, not overlay, when there's no overlay of concepts and constructs, this understanding that there's something like a soul in us, something very unique that has to do with whatever we call this, but like the essence of who we are. That's quite intuitive for children. I
Hmm.
have never met a single child that does not like say like, yeah, there's something in me, I can feel it. Never met.
Hmm.
I've met grown-ups who have, or who say that they don't have this feeling, who say they don't have the feeling, but then upon further questioning or discussion, and sort of asking specific questions, things that hint at what you just said. Do you feel like usually when you talk to someone who has not yet really fully investigated their spiritual self, they will best respond to questions such as, you know, how do you feel about what happens after death, or how do you feel about, where this part of you were before it came here. Yeah, so these questions are spiritual questions, as we call them, that arise in a person when this question is stated. Okay, so that's also the reason why there's spiritual teachers and so forth out there, because when we live our normal 3D life, all right, and for example, in the extreme, are so busy with, like, say, just surviving, okay, we might actually never get to asking ourselves those questions. But as soon as we do, something in us arises. And probably the best way to call this is a feeling, because we can't really prove it, not in the sense of natural sciences. And, there's something like that feels it's continual. Now it's continual. It defies, like let's say the laws of time. It doesn't feel that it dies with, just our physical body dying. It feels that it is almost like a separate entity, and it is. And even science admits that. Yeah, that the seat of the consciousness is not related to the brain. Yeah, and this is something that takes a little while and a little bit of study to actually let this sink in. Yeah, because we all are conditioned to believe, or the conditioned to identify with our thoughts. So we believe that we, the I and me, is my brain. And everyone who starts asking questions that have to do with purpose, or that have to do with love, or that have to do with truth, or that have to do with peace, things that we call higher vibratory goals in life, cannot really answer that with natural science. Okay, so there's a questioning needed, and also at some point, as we will learn, studying, all right, to better understand, these greater frameworks of life and the universe. We call this cosmic wisdom. All right, cosmic wisdom. Those of you who have an affinity to astrology or astronomy, or say mythology, yeah, you might actually already have a very intuitive understanding, of some of these aspects of cosmic wisdom. Okay, it's very interesting for those of us who have always had an interest, say, in astrology or astronomy, and when we then begin to actually study spiritual sciences, to find out that there is a lot of truth in that, just differently from how we thought it was. All right, so let's begin. Oh, anybody else? Feelings around the word spiritual identity. What comes up for you? What you understand as such? Sheila gave us a very good, a very well-rounded and neutral definition of what comes up for her. Does anybody have maybe a different way of understanding spiritual ID, spiritual identity?
Yona, hi, it's Janet.
Hi, Janet.
Hi. Well, going from what Sheila and what you just discussed, which is recognizing ourselves or myself as a spiritual being, I think then the taking the same definition, but it's kind of sliding around to a different perspective of identifying with my spiritual self,
Mm.
meaning there's one side of acknowledging it, but then I being living as my identity as a spiritual self, identifying with it,
Very
is,
cool. Hmm.
like the action of it, living it. Then, yeah, that's kind of the more um, dynamic version of being spiritual, and that spiritual identity brought up for me.
Yeah, it expresses like the intention, right, to live as such, or to bring it into the spirit, the physical reality,
Yeah,
and to
it's a
harmonize
really,
it.
it's like that
Hmm.
allowing. It's like this the spiritual.
Hmm.
I identify with it, and I step forward with it, and I don't know entirely every little detail. However, I have to identify with it and have that expression and experience at the same time.
And Yes, it's very important what you just said, Janet, because in the past we have already spoken about the extremes of what we identify with, right? We can identify with the brain and the thoughts and the physical material 3D body, right? And that has an effect on how we see life, how we perceive reality. And we can see ourselves as a spirit being, yeah, primarily identify ourselves with, being a spirit being, having a physical experience. And that affects our, attitude, our perspective on life, and with that, our perception of reality. So we already know that there is something like a duality in us. Yeah, two different perspectives that we can take that come with different levels of perception, all right, and also affect how we, not only understand ourselves, but also how we understand life and the purpose of life. So that's quite important to note here. Yeah, that depending on what we identify with, all right, we will see the world and ourselves in it differently. And science, like our current, nature science paradigm, states that truth is absolute. It needs to be objective. Okay, only if it's objective, only if you can see it only one way, then it can be true. But we've just identified, yeah, that depending on how we see ourselves and the world that we live in, we experience it differently. And this is one of those big mysteries of life, of 3D life. I mean, you hear uh, coaches, therapists, teachers, and so forth talk about this all the time. Yeah, that when you change your perspective, you change your perception, and with your perception, your reality changes. So, which one is the real reality now? Yeah, which one should we do? We constantly experience this duality within ourselves, and that's basically part of our struggles. If we see ourselves as a physical being only, all right, then we will, basically suffer the awareness that our life has an expiration date, that it ends at some point. Yeah, that there's something like a height of your being, like when you like 30 or something, and then from there on it declines because the physical begins to decline. If you see yourself as a physical being only, then basically you start resenting the fact that you're aging because there's only it can only get worse from here on. Now that's the materialistic perspective that leads us to believe that we have to live life to the fullest. There's only one life, and anything that comes after 30 or 40 or 50 nowadays, it's a little older than it used to be. Just goes downhill from there. Um, Another consequence of the materialistic life perspective is also that it can be quite void of purpose. Yeah, because if we see everything, through this objectively defined reality, then we must come to the conclusion that our life is just sort of a consequence of randomly colliding atoms, okay, and that nothing has purpose, that there is no purpose. And this can lead to quite a few psychological challenges, as we all know. It can lead to anxiousness or anxiety, like fearing for, the end of our lives, yeah, the fear of death. It can lead to something like emptiness in us, because if nothing really has any purpose, then why trying? Why try? Yeah. And last but not least, it can also lead to like a profaning of the physical life altogether, in a way that we just compare our physical life and put it on the same level. Yeah, you see this a lot with the comparison, or this sort of misconstrued Darwinistic view of us developing, from animals. We're just like sort of higher animals. So that really negates, yeah, that human being a human is something other than, a physical 3D being. On the other hand, if we see ourselves only as a spirit being, only as a soul, only as sort of immaterial, then we typically have a tendency to struggle with the 3D-ness of life, yeah, with making living, with struggling with interaction with other people, struggling with making choices, and taking responsibility for those choices. Those are very, very common issues when we are on the outer extremes of these perspectives. If we, however, and this is basically the suggestion that I'm making here, and that mostly all religions really do, offer a perspective where you unify both these extremes and understand yourself as a spirit being that is having a physical experience for a specific purpose. This purpose we have not really explained yet or proven yet, and we will attempt to do this here in this workshop. But the point being is that it's neither one or the other alone. It is both at the same time. Yeah. And once more, I liked how you said this, Janet. You said it's more like an allowing. Yeah. The question is, what are we allowing? Are we allowing our soul to be there, or do we have to learn to allow our physical to be there? And this is then where it gets interesting for me as a spiritual coach and counselor, because this is very unique. Some people have more issues with allowing the physical to be there, and others have more issues with allowing the spiritual to be there. At the end of the day, and this is basically the bigger goal of all of what we are, quote unquote, trying to figure out here, is that we somehow feel we need to build a bridge. If we allow this to become fragmented within, yeah, if we allow this to be like like a, if we allow a split there, if we allow a schism there between these two, all right, then we experience quite a bit of pain. Okay, so there's something here in this cosmic order, okay, that gently or not so gently guides us into the direction of building a bridge between those two realities, of harmonizing both of them. And because, as I suggested in the beginning, we're looking at this this development here of ourselves as spirit beings in a developmental way, all right, that happens over multiple lifetimes, not just over a weekend or within a decade. We also must recognize that, even previous lives that we had, let's say, actually, let me ask you, who of you has, something like an inkling or feeling that they've had previous existences on this planet in the physical before? Maybe not visions of it, or recollection or memories, but something like an inkling, like a feeling of, yeah, I feel like I've been here before. Yeah. So that's more than half of you. And this is if you do surveys, in with the general population, then actually roughly half of people say that. Okay, they have an inkling of that. They might not be able to explain it. They have no specific memories or anything like that, but they do have an inkling. All right, so let's say you had a previous life or multiple previous lives, but let's say you had a previous life um, during the time of the Egyptian Chaldean epoch, or let's say you had an incarnation during the Greco-Roman epoch. Okay, do you really think that the way you thought and the way you saw the world at the time was or is comparable with how you see the world here today in this lifetime? Considering some of the historical things that you know about and the conscious level, the overall conscious level at the time? Probably not. Yeah, so typical sort of inclination um, memories are, having been a slave uh, during Egyptian times, or having been burned on the stake as a witch during, say like medieval times. Incarnations during Roman times are also very common, and incarnations during Atlantean times, um, incarnations during more Eastern, like Japanese or Chinese um, empire times. So those are very common recollections. Is that something that you guys have? Anybody wants to share if they have like a more detailed inkling or feeling for past lifetimes, what times you felt, you don't have to prove this, but what times you felt like you um, may have been here before, or you have like um, unexplainable affinities to certain types of wisdom or certain types of culture, certain types of music, things that just sort of resonate with your soul. Anybody?
I'll
Yeah,
talk
hey,
briefly about it. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it. I haven't spent a lot of time, even in my early times of discovering that I'm spirit or spirits, whatever, whatever, wherever I started. I didn't spend a lot of time going, oh, I was in past lives or being part of seances or any of that kind of thing. However, when you ask the question, it feels like there were certain periods that I definitely was living in somehow,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and that in some ways I was the same soul. I was the same
Mm-hmm.
observer in those lifetimes, um, and that yeah, and that for different people, that maybe different lifetimes are to learn certain things a certain way, and then sometimes I feel like the way I learn things is different than how other people are learning them, like the lessons. Although I feel like today, while I'm talking, that I must have gotten a few things incorrect in the earlier lifetimes because I'm like, oh, I'm learning this now, like how to, take care of my body properly, perhaps. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it, so it's really, uh, I find it's cool to hear people's stories, but at the same time, I find it more practical to be, or more of a growth possibility to look at it in terms of the purpose of
Mm-hmm.
it.
And that's really
Yeah.
ultimately then, why we even want to investigate this. I like how you said you're not really paying too much attention to it. I don't really want to go into past life regression here. I was just interested in seeing what kind of cultural epoch you guys specifically
Well,
here, the
I,
live
I've
audience,
I've
feels.
had inklings that there's something Egyptian that I should just avoid
Okay,
in this lifetime.
okay,
Japanese and Chinese, and for some reason it keeps leaning to Japanese more.
okay.
Um, yeah, and it's definitely some sort of European. I don't think it's just family background,
Hmm.
early European. You know,
Like
I don't
paganism
know.
time, like
I don't know
Druids.
if it was like Celtic or if it was like,
Okay.
France sort of thing. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like,
Okay. Yeah, no, that I mean, there is an element of your actual lineage in that, but that's actually much smaller than people think. So it's not that we keep getting reincarnated into the same cultural group. Okay. Um, but yeah, that's, I mean, what you just said, I hear this all the time. Any other cultural epochs that you feel connected with or feel resonant with, or even dissonant, like Janet just described, like you should avoid them because something happened there and you really don't want to go into this.
Yeah, hey, Yona,
Yeah.
I always found this extremely fascinating in terms of not digging into it like on purpose,
Mm-hmm.
but when certain things would come forward and I would get some kind of inner feeling of this is familiar to me,
Mm-hmm.
um, that kind of a connection. And I found that in a couple of different cultures, Mayan in particular,
Mm-hmm.
um, Celtic, which is also still a bit lineage with my current,
Mm-hmm.
family background too. Um, and then and the reason that I found that to be interesting and meant something to me as far as like spiritual backgrounds, maybe, or whatever, is that I also kept looking at like if I tried to force myself, let's say, into like the Japanese or the Chinese cultural things,
Mm-hmm.
none of that ever
Okay,
connected to
very
me.
nice.
So
Okay,
I
so
tested
also
myself.
disconnect. Also
Yes,
disconnect
like
with
there,
something. Not
yes,
like
like there,
traumatic or anything. I should avoid it,
no, no, no.
but just like I
It,
can't really connect with it. It doesn't seem like
right.
it's part of my
Yeah, like I
recollection.
don't,
Hmm.
correct. Like I don't feel like I've ever had that experience. Like my experiences, like if I were feeling into that, I've felt into, okay, there's an experience that I feel like I've had that's connected to the Mayan culture or a
Hmm.
feeling of connection to like the Celtic culture. And then um yeah, so that part I always thought was really very interesting, and I find certain parts of my own physical reactionary stuff to being bound and drowned, that
Mm,
comes from nothing in my life right now. Like I
okay.
didn't have any traumatic experience with those
Mhm.
things, but it is extremely physically. I have physical reactions to those certain
So
kinds
not
of things.
necessarily in cultural backdrop to it, but like an actual traumatic experience in the past, like a spiritual
Yeah.
memory. We call this. This is a spiritual
Hmm.
memory. It's not an actual memory, like you remember what you did this morning, but it is a memory that somehow sits in you somatically in your body. Hmm.
Yeah, and that part does feel like East Coast of the United States, a little bit
Hmm.
of the Salem witchy
The Salem
stuff. You know
witch.
what I mean? Yeah,
Hmm.
like there feels a bit of the bound and drown thing. Yeah,
Hmm. Cool.
but
Thanks for
yeah.
sharing.
Hmm.
Yeah. Any other cultural epochs or um, experiences that you for yourself or your own journey can make out as part of your spiritual memory without having to define them or knowing anything about them or identifying with them, but just making them out as part of you, not this life, but it is definitely part of you, like Sheila just said, it is the same witnesser. Does anybody, and this is not related to the current social discussion of this topic, but does anybody have actual experiences, like spiritual memories of having lived a life in a different gender?
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
there were many times. The ones that I kind of feel come up the most are I'm almost always single. I'm rarely like in long-term relationships, and I'm always some connection to if I'm female, I've been healing,
Mm-hmm.
and if I'm male, I'm very physically experiencing, well, like physical life experience. Yeah, so it's been, yeah, that has felt really
Mm-hmm.
very interesting, and being an observer in those things is like what I like when I feel into like what do I remember about that? It feels like I can look back at it almost, it's almost like having a dream. It's almost like how I feel like when I
Mm-hmm.
dream. You know what I mean? I'm
Mm-hmm.
an observer in my dreams, and I can
Mm-hmm.
practice and participate in my life in a dream that gives me experience. And yeah, so there's
Yeah, and
different ones
it's
that
it's a
mhm.
good comparison because in a dream you experience yourself from within. You don't
Yeah.
necessarily see yourself from the outside. You see yourself from within, and unless there's a clear sort of string of events that identify you as a woman or a man,
Mhm.
sometimes it's even hard to tell, what you are gender wise, but you'd be able to tell by the activities that you engage in, at
Mhm.
least sort of with the background.
Yeah, and I find it very interesting because there's a distinct different feeling to me in terms of like remembering a quote unquote dream feeling or a memory of
Hmm.
a dream versus having these kinds of feelings that feel very deeper than a dream, like I lived
Hmm.
them kind of thing. You know what I mean? And so those things have a different feeling as far as that memory.
Yes, very nice. Thank you for actually taking the time to articulate this, because after all, and we all know this, it's quite difficult to find the right words. I like this. For me personally, all my past life memories are as what I would say male. Okay, and this was a big part of my own confusion as a child, not in regard to my gender. Like, I did not consider changing my gender, but I did feel it was a mistake. I did feel like I ended up in the wrong body. I did not, I was not able to connect with my body um, as a woman. That I found very, very strange, because every kind of spiritual memory I had was as a man. And this is quite interesting, because when I listen to the current discussion about transgender, I distinctly remember having those type of feelings and also visions with it. So I had spiritual vision very early in my life, um, and I clearly felt that this isn't something that I'm familiar with. Okay, today I know better, and there's can be many other reasons why somebody feels this way. I don't want to cover this today. This is a topic that I would maybe like to discuss with some of you at a later time, okay? Because it's so pertinent right now in our society. But nonetheless, we can have those kind of spiritual memories. Yeah, like Sheila said, it's not the same as a dream, but it has similarities, because there's a more of a like sort of an inside out, like we're experiencing ourselves from the inside, like in a dream. It's a very good descriptor for that. Um, when it comes to spiritual identity, and now we're moving into the actual sort of more conceptual part here. All right, we got to consider a few things that you see here in the slide: aligning, tethering. We will have to touch on the forces that support and the forces that hinder us in this obtaining of a spiritual identity. But before we can even fully understand that, we need to understand, what the spiritual identity is, and why would there be forces that support or hinder us. And when we discuss that, then we also need to understand, well, what are these forces? Yeah, where do they come from? Is there a hierarchy? Is there, in this sort of greater tapestry of the cosmos, is there actually, much more than we can see, and that, perhaps works through us, even here in 3D. So we will cover the spiritual hierarchies today, which is something that is extremely instrumental for understanding yourself as a spirit being, because it answers a lot of questions in regard to purpose. Spiritual authority, what is that in the sense of self, like what is actually entailed in developing an I? I have a feeling that this is how far we will get today. And then there were some other issues that arise, if we look at sort of what we do ourselves, if we reflect on, our own spiritual awakening process and how we have been approaching it. For example, spiritual consumption is one of the most typical issues on the way. Without judgment here, this is just something that we need to understand, how that relates to our journey, yeah, of becoming a conscious soul self. And probably the most complex concept, esoteric concept to understand is the building of the resurrection body, that has to do with the etherization. So this whole workshop series is called Electrification and Etherization. In each of these workshops, we are sort of clarifying little puzzle pieces, yeah, that when we put them together, actually explain to us, yeah, what the title means. Yeah, so that's not something that we will be able to discuss today, but I keep those topics that arise here on this list and then transfer them over to the next part. All right, so these are the topics here: spiritual authority, sense of self, developing an I, spiritual hierarchies, aligning, tethering, forces that support and hinder us, and hopefully also the term spiritual consumption. So last time we ended with an interesting contemplation, and I said, well, I can give this to you as a little bit of a contemplation task here. What was there first, the light or the I that witnesses the light? What was there first? It's the chicken or the egg question, and it is a very common topic, maybe not formulated in this way, but it's a very common topic when you talk to other people about spirituality. What was there first? The light or the I that witnesses the light? Or witnessed? What do you think? Does there have to be something there to be witnessed in order for us to develop the sense for it? Or can we only witness what we have the senses for?
My first intuition is like, well, it seems like it should be the light, because if there was no light, then the eye wouldn't witness the light, right? But
Mm-hmm.
it's a bit like, but I also tried to use that same thought process when somebody posed the question about, well, if a tree fell in the woods and there was nobody there to hear it, would that tree still make a sound? Of course, I'm like, well, of course it makes a sound. And actually, people say, well, technically that's a vibration, and there might not be sound if you don't have an ear to hear the sound. And I went, oh, well, that's interesting. So I, I don't know. I would say the light, but I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Okay, any
Because if
more?
the tree makes a sound, but it doesn't. If you don't have an ear to hear the sound, then I guess the tree doesn't make a sound. I don't know.
Okay.
Interesting.
It's a very good analogy. It's a similar question, but it entails aspects of, like, the sender and the receiver. Okay, but here this is a bit more specific and a lot easier than the question that you stated. Any other contemplations? It's not a quiz. It's not about being right or wrong. I like how Sheila just basically shared her thinking process here. This question could also be stated in a more neutral way, or perhaps even in a more specific way as well. Let me rephrase the question in a more neutral way, and then rephrase it one more time in a more specific way. Did we develop our senses based on 3D? Okay. Or were our senses there first? It's a chicken or egg problem. And in a more specific way, I could ask, is the fact that we have energetic sensations, or spiritual sensations, if you will, spiritual feelings, is that a consequence of these spiritual things being there? Yeah, do we develop these what we call spiritual organs because these spiritual things are there? Or do we develop the organs and then these spiritual things appear?
I would contemplate there needs to be a template first before something can arrive in 3D. So I would say that the spiritual or light exists first to to create a template for something to arrive into 3D. So coming into the earth plane, first there would be a thought of, from spirit to create something, and there has to be maybe the etheric template. Is it like can hold the thought and the manifestation for a physical
Development
construct
of some
to
construct.
arrive? Yeah, that's how I would contemplate that.
Well, you actually added another component to this. You said that the word was there, the concept was there first. The word. In the Bible, it says, in the beginning was the word. The word.
It does, yeah.
And the word was with God, and God was with the word.
Because you would have to have a thought in the mind of God. If we go into that, the mind of God has an inspiration, perhaps. I don't know how. I can sort of feel it like that. There's a feeling that something could be created, and in that feeling, there's a thought, and then the actual doing and creating it maybe is the word, because the word is part of creation. Like it will be. I think it, and then create it like we do as humans. I can have a thought and then contemplate and then look at how I can create. But it's a thought that had to arise in me first.
Yeah, or desire, or like you called it, inspiration, or the conception of something. Yeah, the conception of something. Now, you referred this to God, okay, which is a little bigger than, what we have been talking about so far, but it's okay. All right. I like, how you phrase it, and I specifically like, your willingness to actually articulate this, because that's really what happens, because now as you are trying to create the word, all right, to the conception that you have, the spiritual conception that you have, you are actually beginning to create something. So yes, it may not be understandable for everybody, but I feel exactly where you're coming from with this. In spiritual science, we recognize that, when something can conceive itself, all right, it seeks to witness itself. And that's maybe, a little better to understand. So it is, your consciousness that witnesses you, okay, what we just talked about here, via those examples with, maybe past lives or affinities, resonances, and so forth. So you recognize there's something very unique about you, now that there's something in you that perceives the world, and that this does not seem to be limited to just one lifetime. That's one aspect of it. And as soon as you do recognize that, then something like a desire arises, yeah, to, we called this earlier, harmonize, yeah, to harmonize your 3D experience with it. Yeah. Here, related back to this question, that was just sort of a bit of a brain teaser for us to learn to access this part of our own, sort of more spiritual organs. Here, it would mean that you were there first, and out of you being there, the desire arose to witness yourself, and that's fundamentally how we define or how we describe consciousness. So we are there, we exist, and nobody can deny this. We all exist, and out of the existence itself, the desire arises to witness ourselves. And as we are witnessing ourselves, something happens in us. So there's obviously an interaction here. I think you guys are all aware of this. So that's why it's so difficult to define these things, because we feel this as a constant interaction. It's not a one-way street. In spiritual sciences, this particular question is, what was there first, the light or the eye that witnesses the light? The light was there first, and then the organ to witness it, needed to be developed. This development has been taking millions and millions of years, billions of years actually, if you refer this to the physical eye, to our physical eye. All right. And in the course of this development, different stages, could be observed. Yeah, namely, depending on how we see the light. We needed different organs for that, and we now know that there were certain times in our physical development where certain parts of us were farther developed than they are now, or not farther, but as individual organs, say, more specified, and that over the course, like say, even in the last 50 years or 500 years, we can witness this, a degradation, a deterioration takes place. So organs aren't static, the way our eyes are today. That's not how they were, 10,000 years ago. Why? Because our eyes had different functions at the time, and our understanding of ourselves and our world was different then. Nowadays, especially in the last 50 years, we can clearly find that actually the specialization of our physical senses, our five senses, is deteriorating. Yeah, it's going down, being compensated with other senses that are starting to develop more. So there's, for example, we all know there's energetic sensitivity. We can make out like a 15, 18 percentile of the population is having active, energetic experiences. So energetic, just, different word for immaterial, not to call it spiritual. We could call it spiritual and it'd be the same, because, at this point we're defining spiritual as anything in the immaterial. Yeah, so 15 to 18% of people have something like spiritual or energetic experiences, senses. Like you think of someone and they start calling you, or you feel the presence of like your great grandmother with you, and you really clearly feel her being there, or feeling the presence of a guardian angel, or things like that. So these things are not uncommon. All right. And as we are observing the development of our senses, new definitions of these senses actually arise. So we now actually know, we as in, what is established as nature science, that we have 9 senses. 9 senses, yeah, are proven. Are proven. Not just the sense for taste, smell, sight, hearing, and touch, but also senses that have to do with our ability to feel balance, our ability to feel warmth, our ability to feel, the mobility and so forth. This will be subject of our perception workshop series, where we go through these senses that we all have, but not all of them being fully developed. And there's 3 more senses besides those 9 that science now, establishes as like every human has those. Okay, there's 3 more that not every human has, but a lot of people beginning to develop. And if you believe it or not, the one of these is actually the sense for the I, okay, for the self. Not just basic self-awareness, but the sense for your own spiritual self. So this will be a future workshop in 2 weeks, and I'm looking forward to that. Okay, so very nice. So we've already gotten, to a place now where we can better understand, the first attempt to define what a spiritual identity is. Now we've made our own contemplations, we've thought our own thoughts, and we've investigated our own feelings about it. And some of you have already come to a place where they've chosen a certain framework or a certain way, a certain perspective of looking at it. So here I would like to share with you something like, textbook, definition of what spiritual identity is. And from here on, we'll do this a little more, because all these other spiritual vocabulary words or esoteric vocabulary words that we covered in these past 6 to 8 hours here of this ongoing workshop series was just preparation. Okay, we're now getting to a place where we can actually think these things ourselves, have a proper feeling along with it, and also recognize upon reflection on ourselves that this insight, yeah, that there's something there, also requires us to kind of do something with it, yeah, to maybe like Julian, like you just said, apply it somehow, put it into action. So spiritual identity refers to the essence of who we are on our deepest level, beyond our physical body, our emotions, and our thoughts. It encompasses the recognition and understanding of ourselves as a spiritual being connected to a higher source or consciousness. Okay, this is something that you guys did here in the past half hour. Yeah, whether you're aware of it or not, but that's basically what you guys shared here with us. This sense of identity transcends the limitations of the ego and is rooted in the awareness of one's divine nature. So there's something that we can feel that is, part of a greater, cosmic or divine order, if you will. Yeah, so it is rooted in the awareness of one's divine nature, purpose, and interconnectedness with all of creation. That's the interaction part. Developing a spiritual identity involves exploring and aligning with one's core values, beliefs, and inner truths, resulting in the reality that we perceive. So we become aware of how the reality that we perceive aligns or doesn't, or misaligns, or does not align with our values, our beliefs, and our inner truths. This is a huge step in a person's spiritual development, yeah, where we have something like a moral consideration, where we see like, okay, we can't just talk one way and then act another way. Yeah, this creates a sort of a psychological split in us, a cognitive dissonance, and that's then typically what we called the ego struggles. The ego struggles are nothing but, the schism that we experience through our own duality. Yeah, on one hand, identifying ourselves as our material being only, and on the other hand, identifying ourselves as the spiritual being in us, and then sort of not knowing how to harmonize, how to bridge that. It requires the willingness to take responsibility for how we think, feel, and choose in this world, which makes us aware of how much we need to heal to spiritually evolve. Yeah, this is something that a lot of people struggle with, because the first thing they experience when they spiritually awaken is, the awareness how unhealed they are and how many things are, still flawed. Yeah. So the ego, which is, in a simplistic way, uh, kind of narcissistic, okay, has a tendency to idealize itself. Yeah, it internalizes all successes and all good things and externalizes blames or whatever, justifies all negative experiences. Yeah, and that's something that when we spiritually awaken, as we're beginning to build this bridge, becomes more aware to us, like how we have been deceiving ourselves, or how we're projecting our stuff onto others, or how we perhaps don't really want to take responsibility for things in our life, or this and that and the other. So, what needs to be healed is basically just the aspects of ourselves that we cannot love about ourselves yet. This might entail, you know, flaws and perfections, but also trauma, especially shadow aspects, things that we cannot identify with, but yet do anyway. Okay, these kind of things. All the things that create a dissonance in you, that create a schism in you, those are all things that become aware to us at the beginning of our spiritual development, because that's the first thing we see. We can connect with the spiritual ideal very easily, but then we have to look at our real life, our interactions with others, etc., the way we make living, and see that there's a little bit of a disconnect here. Okay, and that needs to be healed. Yeah, how much we need to heal to spiritually evolve. So developing a spiritual identity follows the journey of self-discovery, growth, and awakening to the deeper dimensions of existence as a natural evolutionary process. It's a natural thing, all right, to connect with all the things that still need to be healed, refined, improved with yourself. And we've touched upon this a little bit when we talked about karma, because ultimately the understanding of like the purpose of karma, like that karma is basically our higher selves attempt to improve something, to refine something, to finish unfinished business, or to heal something that was traumatic in the past. Then allows us to understand, okay, everything is evolving, not just within this one lifetime, but throughout multiple lifetimes, and perhaps even in a greater sense throughout multiple cultural epochs, and in an even greater sense, throughout, the more cosmic order of things, where we're actually evolving not just as this human self, but where we're actually evolving into our higher supernatural abilities. That then requires us to understand spiritual hierarchies, because if we don't know, what these higher faculties are, and where they're coming from, and what the purpose of them is, then we will still remain schismatic about it, because we don't actually know where this is going. Okay, we in our small brain here, in our small eye, okay, always tend to downgrade or minimize things to one lifetime, which is basically the process of 80 years, 70 of 80 years. This is a major flaw, major limitation of our ego mind, guys. Yeah, because the moment you start seeing yourself as a spirit being, you have to understand that, this 70, 80 years of a lifetime is really just a tiny, 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 tiny fraction of the total journey that your soul goes through. Yeah, it's a moment, it's a minute. Yeah, in the total lifetime or total, evolutionary learning curve that you're going through. Yeah, this is really, really important that you understand that. So whatever it is that you think you're learning, um, it's just a tiny fraction of what you're actually learning. Yeah. However, the fact that you're contemplating what it is that you're healing, that what it is that you're working on, that you're refining, and that you're learning is already huge. Yeah. This qualifies you as someone who's spiritually awakened, because someone who's spiritually awakened starts questioning these things. So once we become aware of our unique spirit soul being that is having a 3D physical experience, we begin to question the limitations and also the purpose of our experience in 3D, which is called spiritual awakening. Spiritual awakening then makes us aware of our higher self. This is the idealized. At first, it's just idealized, okay, but it is something that we can make out. It's clearly, sort of more healed, more refined, more improved, than how we experience ourselves. So our spiritual awakening makes us aware of our higher self that is in juxtaposition with our ego self. So, on one hand, we begin to feel that there's something higher in us, but on the other hand, we also realize how far away we are from embodying it, from living our life like it. And I called this earlier the cognitive dissonance, the pain, the struggle of 3D. It shows us what needs to be healed, purified, and refined, which leads us to develop our spiritual organs. So here now you see something like causality. Okay, I'm saying it is the pain of realizing how sort of not refined, how not healed, how how low we are, that then in return leads to our spiritual organs to develop, which then in return provide us with new levels of perception. Let's contemplate this for a moment. So spiritual awakening makes us aware of our higher self that is in juxtaposition with our ego self. It shows us what needs to be healed, purified, and refined, which leads us to develop our spiritual organs, which in return provide us with new levels of perception. How do you understand this?
Yeah, and everybody, what I'm understanding from it, or at least what was the little switch turned on, was it's not just identifying my higher self. It's identifying that there is a quote unquote higher existence. Now, there's a faster
Mm-hmm.
vibratory existence, and that the energy that's embodied here is part of something bigger. And that's one of the key things to develop, because, like you mentioned, with our organs, a lot of them are devolving because the system and the system, the way it's set up, is there, like over stimulating it. So it's very
Mm-hmm.
hard to, and a lot of the things that we naturally would are valuable in a faster vibratory existence uh, are kind of like not important in the material sort of vibration
Mm-hmm.
energy. So then we kind of forget about those higher organs. I guess I would call it maybe a higher organ. And that also at the same time when we're discussing this, that our existence is not part of a line. That this is the question I have actually with it is that we're part of a continuum. At first, I think it's a circle, but I think I know it's not a circle. Um, and that we already exist in our future, our past, what we identify as time. Is that pertinent here? Like we already have those organs. We already know. There's part of us that already knows the know. We just have to walk that path and decide that and action that and identify with that to be to honor our true spiritual self. Otherwise, we're not walking that original vibration. We're devolving, like what you said.
Yeah, so just for clarification here, I was not qualifying this. I was saying that in the course and in the totality of the course of our development as humans, there were senses that developed their highest sort of state, maybe 100,000 years ago or 40,000 or 10,000 years ago, but because we don't need them anymore or needed them anymore as much, or we don't need them anymore today as much as we needed them back then. I was in my mind, I was referring to things such as like eyesight, for example. Like when you were out there hunting to survive, okay, your survival was more or less dependent on your ability to see far. This is something that is clearly deteriorating nowadays because we no longer have that 3D need to do that. Do you know what I mean? So I was actually uh, referring to quite the opposite. However, what you're saying is not
I see.
incorrect. It's not incorrect because I did not exclude that, at other times we may have had a much higher spiritual connection, okay, that did not require us, to go through what we call a spiritual awakening process. All right. We came to this world in a spiritual awakened state. All right. And this is actually quite an interesting thought process here. Um, and therefore didn't put the emphasis on developing or refining anything in that regard. Okay. It was more important for us to perhaps develop and refine our intellectual capacities, which we know today is one of the major developments in the last 2,000 years, now, if not the last 5,000 years. Yeah, major development for humans is the development of intellectual capacities and the manifestations thereof, which we call technological progress. All right, this is the direct consequence of us humans, focusing on developing our intellect, literally. Okay. So that said, there's always sort of a give and take. Okay. In the course, especially of the last 500 years, yeah, the materialization of life itself, that then led to a deterioration of some of the spiritual senses that people still had in the Middle Ages, say. Okay. The feeling for God and the interconnectedness with the cosmos. Okay, so I'm basically agreeing with you, Janet. I just meant something different earlier, but it goes hand in hand because everything that I say basically has a two-way meaning. Now, because everything is connected in a two-way, kind of like how you described it with the image of the circle. It is, however, because that was your question, if I understand this right, not just a static circle that just keeps repeating the same thing over and over again. It's more like an expanding and contracting sphere. All right. So there is a spherical rather than a circular nature to it, okay, which overall, has a pulsing nature, which means it does expand and it does contract at times, okay, but overall pulls us into, and this would be the what Julianne called earlier the divine plan or something, that the template of it all gravitates to one particular um, expression, and that would be what you call the fast vibratory expression, yeah, the higher version of itself. So the higher self, okay, is just a construct that we have. When we start our spiritual journey, regardless of our, esoteric or spiritual or religious belief system. You know what I mean? It's just like what we identify as the better me, yeah, the better I. Yeah, we can all conceive a better I. Do you guys know what I mean with that? Yeah. And how do we know that? That we can conceive, the better me, the higher me, the higher self, because we have something like a moral understanding. We have something like, you know, like a ideal of, how it should be. So the template somehow is in us. Yeah, but we struggle with the application, basically. Yeah, that's kind of the mystery of our human life. We have a consciousness, but it's not developed enough yet for us to make enough sense, all right, that we can fully understand the purpose of things, so that we could go through life with a clear sort of understanding of what needs to be done and how we need to choose in order to, become our higher self. Why is that? Because it is not a journey that can be done in one lifetime. It requires us to go through several cycles, of this earthly physical experience, all right, to develop this faster vibratory understanding of what it means to be a human and what the purpose of that human learning experience is. That's all. It's not actually mystical at all. It is just something that, due to our limited perception, namely the perception seen through, our ego that is bound to this physical experience, limited to this one lifetime. As soon as you recognize or acknowledge that, the essence in you, all right, this part in you, as you called it earlier, Sheila, that seems to be the same witnesser. This part, yeah, that we called in the beginning, we called this essence, yeah, or the deeper dimension of yourself, or the higher self, if you will. Yeah, so those are all descriptors for more or less the same thing, namely soul. Okay, the soul feeling. Yeah, the spirit being in us. As soon as you acknowledge that there's a spirit being in you that is not bound to space and time, that is not bound, to this physical life, you must, basically augment your perspective, because you can't really assume that the entirety of your experience is just this one experience that you're having right now. It's much, much bigger than that. So yes.
Yona.
Mm-hmm. No, go ahead.
So yeah, so when I'm reading that and I was thinking about, it reminds me of the question, or I think the comment that you had said earlier about, are we, because I wrote this down and it really stuck out, are we allowing soul or physical? And I, and I keep looking back at that when I wrote it down, and that come back up when I'm reading this, because to me, that reminds me of the experiences have been both. So like if I can, what we were talking about earlier, some of the feelings of those past experiences have been experiencing life physically, and I had to learn, for lack of better words, but to learn how to allow my soul to
Mm-hmm.
express. And then other times I was very soul oriented, like healer stuff and whatever. And I felt like I was trying to learn how to allow my physical to be here.
Mm-hmm.
And this time I'm really finding every single time I turn around, I'm really trying to figure out how to harmonize both. And, and what do you do when I think when you use the word, integrate them and unify both of them, the spiritual and physical existence. And, what does that look like and how does that feel is kind of that bigger question.
Yes,
And
it is.
yeah,
Thank you for asking it. I've been
yeah,
waiting for it. Yeah, that is the big question. What's all this for?
yeah.
Where do we go from here? Let's
Because
say we
it
figure
tends,
it out this lifetime.
right.
What then? Where does this go from here? Yes, wonderful.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you just nailed it, in your own words, Sheila. Developing our spiritual organs, then, the spiritual organs would be the organs that actually allow us, seen from this lifetime and this cultural epoch that we're in. Okay.
Mhm.
We've already discussed this at length. The difficulty with this particular cultural epoch that we are in right now is the materialization of reality, almost to the point of, uh, only material exists. We're like at the pinnacle of that. We're at the height of materialism right now, where even human life is defined through material descriptors. Yeah, this is something, why this is the reason why I had us explore, the societal aspects of our spiritual awakening first, because we've already identified that as our condition, as our outer condition. All right. So in this cultural epoch, clearly the task is to spiritualize ourselves. I'm saying to spiritualize ourselves again because we've already been at that place, but perhaps we as a whole humanity didn't have enough intellect for fully understanding what this next phase, what comes after the, building this bridge, after harmonizing the spiritual and the material, and therefore needed to spend, a couple of thousand years, or hundreds of years, multiple centuries in, like developing our intellectual capacity as a humanity, so that we as a whole humanity could move on. All right. So this is, how I would describe this in my own words. Okay. So there are certain things that we as a whole humanity have to develop, and this happens in the course of multiple centuries and millennia. All right. And our own personal journey, okay, that occurs within those epochs. All right. That, basically carries our own specific, our own individual stamp, depending on perhaps when we entered all of this. Yeah. So some of us, and you've heard this expression, and many people use this without ever thinking about it, but we use this expression of a young soul or an old soul. When we meet someone, and sometimes you can even see this in kids. You can literally look at a 1-year-old and feel that this guy has been around many times already. Yeah, just by the way they look at the world with their eyes, and how they how they respond to the world. Yeah. So not everybody has the exact same number of lives and developmental sort of learning experiences per lifetime. This is very, very individual. So there is this as above, so below, guys, that you always need to keep in mind. Yeah, that ontogenesis equals phylogenesis, which means that the way the universe develops is also how the individual parts of the universe develop. They all have to go through the same developmental process. And this is what makes it so multifaceted and complex for us, because our brains really can't think in all these different dimensions. Yeah, we have the the cosmological development, then we have the planetary developments, then we have the cultural or the physical, the Darwinistic, the biological developments, then we have the cultural developments, and then we have our own soul development within all these different stages of the bigger development. So I come back to something that I mentioned last in part three, last workshop, where I said, we really have to look at the world and ourselves from a developmental standpoint, okay, that we are all on a journey. Everything is on a journey, okay? Yeah, and so it's like you having, your journey on a boat that is having a journey, yeah, that is on a big ocean that is having a journey, something like that, if that makes sense. Yeah, maybe not the best example, but there's multiple dimensions to this journey. And the moment we start getting a feel for our own personal journey is the moment where we develop a spiritual eye. Okay, not I like EYE, but the I like the self. Okay, and the more we refine this, then, and the more we become aware of, how I said earlier, like what needs to be healed, what needs to be purified, what needs to be refined. All right, the more we ennoble our own identity. Yeah, the more aware, the more conscious we become of who we are. And in that, and this is the important part here, the more you become aware of who you are. Like Sheila, you just said, okay, you have, this sort of spiritual recollection of lifetimes where it was all just about allowing, sort of your spiritual self, and then others where it was all about allowing your physical self. And probably many hundred lifetimes where you just spent in the struggle of harmonizing all this, and just now here in this lifetime, and right now where you're articulating all of this, you're becoming aware of both parts, and you have a sort of a sense of a roadmap, a sense of like, okay, this is my task, this is my purpose, and that's wonderful. And as soon as we become enlightened in that way, that we have this insight, oh, okay, I understand what this is all about. All right, then more questions arise. That's what it means when we refer to like a new perception develops. Yeah, we begin to understand that life has a much bigger scope, and that we are connected to a greater whole, etc., etc. All these things that you've shared here today. So it is the development of our spiritual organs, which you could also call senses, all right, that then lead us to realizing that, or leads us to realizing that we have, or that we are developing these new inner senses, and begin to see a new level of reality that then show us the necessity, to master basically what it is that we need to learn in this lifetime: our thinking, our feeling, and our choosing. So in mastering our thinking, feeling, and choosing, we are then basically beginning to understand the purpose. This is literally what you just said, just in a more sort of spiritual science way of expressing it, Sheila. Yeah. So thinking and feeling and choosing. Yeah. Thinking is the living in your mind and living in your body. Okay. The feeling is, sort of, the spiritual aspect of that. Yeah. So feeling is much more spiritual than you guys think. However, emoting is not, that we always make that distinction. It's very important for you, because many of you still confuse emotions with feelings. Yeah. And then consequently the choosing, which comes from your values and your intentions, and what it actually is. So in one sentence, Sheila, you just described what you want to master here in this lifetime. Yeah, namely, allowing your physical on one hand, but also allowing your spiritual, and making wise choices in the process, which is, the harmonizing, the integrating of that, so that we can, better harmonize with our higher self. Before I give you an answer of that question, because that is actually the next topic, let's just conclude here that making a conscious effort to harmonize our perception, meaning, to bridge the physical and the spiritual reality within us, and living as my higher self, leads me to becoming able to develop my higher human faculties, faster vibratory existence, as Janet called it earlier, which include spiritual sight. Spiritual sight. We'll talk about spiritual sight in the next workshop, what that actually entails. But it is, the conscious effort to harmonize our perception, the conscious effort to harmonize spiritual and material reality, yeah, and living as a higher self, that makes it able for us to develop our higher human faculties. Yeah, so it's again the conception of our higher self, the realizing of all that is not higher. Yeah, like, so we always have to see sort of both sides, the dark and the light and the dark. Yeah, so we see the ideal, and then we see how everything is imperfect and flawed. We have to see both. We have to face both, to work with both. Okay, and make a conscious effort, right, to live, in our higher version, if you will. So the embodying of your I, which would then in its highest state be called, having a spiritual ID, not the highest, but in its definition here, approaching this from the question of what is spiritual identity. So the I is your spiritual identity. Your conscious effort wanting to be like your higher self, like your I, all right, that is your spiritual ID, okay? And the more refined your spiritual identity becomes, right, the more, of these higher faculties you develop. And as you develop these higher faculties, with each layer that you basically unlock, if you will, you also gaining more access to wisdom. Wisdom that does not just result from this one lifetime, wisdom that can also result from previous lifetimes. Yeah, as you just stated, Sheila, yeah, there's some things that you had to learn then and then and there, and some things you uh, may have been able to check off the list, and some things, you're still working on. It's a wonderful way of expressing this, really, with, our normal words, okay? Yeah, some things you're still trying to figure out. Yeah, but there is sort of clearly the conception of what it is, that we need to work on. Once you have that, then is or arises the next question, and this is, where does this go from there? And this is a slide here that you're seeing that I showed last workshop, just real briefly, okay, to give you guys, basically a preview, a sneak preview, and that there's a lot more. I said there's so much more. Here, all that we are discussing here is basically just about these aspects here, yeah, like mastering the physical, and then mastering our spiritual self, yeah, our spiritual side, yeah, mastering, the things that harmonize or must harmonize, with the physical reality in our bodies, okay, and then basically mastering, all these imperfections, these flaws, these things that we experience with ourselves that are contradicting, our higher self, that are working against it. Yeah, dark aspects of ourselves, yeah, our shadow aspects, our ego, our selfishness, our greed, our jealousy, our anxiousness, and things like that. Yeah, so these things all go hand in hand. There is no separating this. Remember last time I mentioned, that a big part of the perceived problem with spiritual awakening is the unrealistic expectation of what spiritual awakening entails. All right. So people expect it to be some sort of blissful moment in which they suddenly, are relieved of all pain and all suffering, and that's it. And then from then on, there's just sort of angels singing and bliss. Okay, while those states can exist. All right, the realism of this is we're kind of far away from this. Yeah, we're here to experience dualism. We're here to experience the light and the dark for a reason. And before we can answer the question, of what it actually is, that we are learning here for real. Okay, yes, we know that it's about bridging the material and the spiritual, overcoming the dualism of our own self, and learning how to harmonize, how to live with this, how to allow all this, how to work our ego out, and so forth. Yeah, we've now arrived at a point where we need to answer the question. So if this was all preconceived, by a higher consciousness, all right, and we've worked out earlier that if it was conceived by a higher consciousness and then created, then the purpose must have been to experience itself, to witness itself. So now we need to ask ourselves the question, okay, so if God created us, all right, to become like Him, so that He, and obviously we don't mean the gender He, but let's just stick with this for now, just because that's how most people talk about God in most languages, so that He could see Himself in us, so that He, the higher, so the highest of all higher selves, could, basically reproduce Himself and see Himself in us. Okay, then we must ask ourselves the question, why didn't He just, I don't know, clone Himself or, duplicate Himself? And Julian, you said something very interesting earlier. You said maybe God had an inspiration.
Yeah.
An inspiration, a meaning like, well, this is a human word, right? Describing something that we experience, right? Like some kind of sudden, like really wise thought or idea that comes in, seemingly out of nowhere. Right? That's what we call when we have an inspiration. We got inspirited, right, by something. Yes, this is something that most spiritual teachings sort of kind of see, but it's not enough. Okay, it's not enough to fully understand this. Really, the whole point of creating yourself, okay, or creating, reproducing yourself, and everybody who is an actual parent might be able to relate to this just a tiny little bit easier. Yeah, when you reproduce yourself, all right, it would not really be satisfying to just look at a copy of yourself, would it now? Have you ever asked yourselves this question? Yeah, what it would like to have kids that are 100% exactly like you. That's
I
it.
would look at, oh, sorry, Yona.
Yeah,
I
go
would look
ahead.
at it like we are like a template, like we have to build it first. So if God wanted to experience itself, like to witness itself and look in that creation of the planet, of the cosmos, of everything, that takes time, right? So there's growth involved in that. and every little piece had to be put into place. And like you said, it's taken eons and eons, and we've had epochs and different, like it's all been like a building block of creation. And I feel like this is my own contemplation of it, that in becoming in the template of a human physical 3D, then we had to go through all the physicalness and even having, instinct and emotions, and then developing our mind and, like you say, developing intellect. All has
And
taken
ego,
thousands
not to
and
mention
thousands of
ego,
years.
right? Like all the
Okay,
temptations
so,
and
yeah, and
compulsions that come with that.
and with our ego came our karma, because then we started creating from our ego, right?
Hmm.
And we possibly, had to then, like, with our karma, the choices that we've made from our ego in the past and past lives and whatever, we now have to actually remember, like, the choices that we've made,
Yeah.
which is through pain, and to become aware. And it has to be understood now from our spiritual self. And until we recognize we have a spiritual identity, we have no other option but to be living out our ego and keep messing around in that sphere.
Hmm.
And actually bringing into awareness. And the impetus for that is the pain when we realize, oh my God, like, when I look at my life and I see how many lifetimes I seem to have lived just in this one lifetime, and I can look back now and go, oh, without judgment now, but what was I thinking or whatever. But what happens in that moment is it's come into my awareness and I've integrated it, and I know now who I am more and more, I suppose. And the impetus comes from realization to, oh, I am a spiritual being, and I can actually witness myself from a higher state and actually understand that this 3D life is not all there is, that the world that we've created is totally coming from the building blocks of ego.
And karma, I really love how you wove this in. I mean, those are, all complex concepts that we've, discussed prior, but I like how you brought this together. So karma really is the consequence of ego. All right. So it is like a safety bolt. It's like the insurance, okay, that from lifetime to lifetime, humans keep refining, healing, and developing. Okay. It's basically, a redemption tool, if you will. Yeah. So this, oh my God, what was I thinking? Okay. This is coming from a higher place. All right. From the place of like, I could have done so much better.
And that's
Well,
when we're able to witness and to actually contemplate. And I would just quickly add, physically, like being here and now, we can, to me, this is how it feels about embodying. I recognize that I am a spirit being and I'm physically here and now with my ego self, with my karma, with everything and the whole of humanity and the cosmos. And I am becoming consciously aware. Otherwise, I am unaware and I'm stuck in the dream of what my mental, intellectual mind
right.
thinks that I am in this one lifetime and that this is all there is. Oh my God, no thanks.
Yeah. And then karma will take over. Karma will take over and make sure that you still develop, that you still keep going.
Yeah, to
Yeah.
remind me again, and that's through the
Hmm.
pain and suffering or whatever it is. And I went
Exactly.
till I go, wait a minute, what's going on? And look from a wider perspective.
That's the discussion we had about the afterlife in part two. Like what actually happens, when we die, and what in us actually determines whether we come back and how we come back and so forth. Yeah, it is actually the contemplation of our higher self upon reviewing our life from this higher developed space or place within ourselves, okay, and recognizing, you know, just like when you look at the choices that a 5-year-old makes, and you're like, yeah, you know, I did not handle that well, but I couldn't have done better, because at the time, I was just at basically the consciousness level of a 5-year-old, or the consciousness level of, whatever ego state I was in. And, that requires a training, of our impartiality. We have to really put ourselves into that place of a parent, in a way, that on one hand wants to recreate itself, and to a certain degree also selflessly, uh, puts himself into providing everything that is needed for the child to grow. And every parent that you ask will say it naturally. You want your kid to be better than you. You want it to excel. You want it to be more or less an improved version of yourself, not just a copy of yourself. You want it to be better. You want it to have a better life. Okay, that's what all parents say. So this is part of the divine template, and therefore something that we can maybe imagine. When we imagine this sort of simplistic, God is, created humans in His likeness and wants to give them the space to grow into an even more refined and better version, perhaps even than himself. There's quite a possibility there. Okay, so these what you call templates, or these patterns or these fractals, they seem to repeat throughout the development of the not just the 3D, but also the cosmos. Okay, so there is a conception of a higher self, and that conception then strives to recreate or to witness itself through various cycles of development. Okay, and the first awareness of ourself that we develop upon spiritual awakening, is really just the beginning of the conscious journey of yourself, because in that moment, like these discussions that we're having here right now, they're extremely valuable, because they actually give us something like a preview and also a better understanding of what it actually is that we are experiencing. We are experiencing, our higher self kicking in, basically, but at the same time also our lower self still being pretty dominant. Okay, so we are in a state of development here where we have to experience both, which is then what we call duality. We have to experience both aspects of ourselves. And now, we're basically getting to the point of it all right, in order to make a choice, in order to develop the desire to grow from within ourselves, not just because daddy said so. Now, that was in the old times where people were still, 100% connected to the spiritual world, Garden of Eden and whatever. There was no temptation. There was no, there was no dualism. It was clear, what we had to, how we had to live our life. Okay, but the more freedom we developed, the more organs, and senses we developed, questioning and, the more, freedom of choice we had, okay, the more duality we begin to experience. And so really, seen through this lens, okay, it becomes more and more clear that what all this is about here, our quote unquote spiritual journey and developing our spiritual identity, is to understand what the journey is that we're on. All right. It's actually, I mean, this is exactly how I see this in the spiritual world, not so far off from a spiritual driver's license. Okay. It's the moment where you start, jumping into your vehicle and say, I know who I am and I know where I'm going. Let me drive the car. In that moment, you do no longer need karma, as sort of the overruling template or pattern, okay, that ensures that you still move forward. Okay, so why does this have to be ensured? Why does there have to be an insurance policy that provides us with a continual learning experience? Why is that? Because we have a choice. Because we are not forced by the universe to grow. And this is really, the core of all spiritual contemplation. How does our spiritual will, even develop? And how does it play out? How do we embody this? Now, in esoteric terms, the way this would be formulated, the way the answer would be formulated would be, we're here to consciously choose the light in the presence of the dark. So we have to experience the presence of the dark. Yeah, we have to wander around blind in the dark, to develop the desire and the willingness, to wanting to go toward the light. Now that's sort of the imagery that you can hold in mind here. And this happens through the confrontation with untruths, with unfreedom, and unlove. I keep repeating this because those are, other spiritual concepts that are really important to understand. What these forces are that we are confronted with and that work through us, not just in one lifetime, but in the cosmic order altogether. Well, here in in this planetary existence, these forces are on one hand, supporting us and ensuring that we grow, that we evolve, all right, and on the other hand, try to hinder us, try to keep us where we're at, or in some cases, also try to pull us into devolution as opposed to evolution. Now, we've established at an earlier point here, I think it was part 1, that the nature, of everything that exists in the universe, as far as we know, is based on evolution, on the development, the refinement, the purification, the further sort of ennoblement of itself. Yeah. So if that is, basically the core or the essence of the universe, if the essence of the universe is continual growth, continual improvement, continual learning, continual refinement, then we could say that all these forces that help us to do that are, the forces of light, and all the forces that are, compelling us, tempting us, or seducing us, or deceiving us, which leads to, a potential stillstand or a continual unawareness in our life, or, not being able to make conscious choices as dark forces. This is a very liberal definition of light and dark forces that does not tie you to any particular spiritual belief. I find it very important that we make an effort to define things in this way. Yeah, because if we just ascertain a certain view, such as there's a God and the God does this and that, all right, we're already excluding a lot of different views. If we talk about, the predominant orders and patterns and things that we can all observe in the universe, these bigger templates, we don't actually have to call it anything. We can just say, okay, this is what we can observe. Everybody can observe that. And evolution is one of those things that we can observe. It seems to be the most natural thing in this universe, that everything evolves. And when things devolve, all right, that's when they die. That's when they decay. That's when they, no longer really strive toward the lights. That's when they are, turning away from it. So if we, then see it through these parental eyes that I offered earlier as just a way to grasp this on a more feeling level, like say you reproduce yourself and you want your kids to excel, okay, and on one hand, obviously you have to teach them the rules, but on the other hand, you also want to give them the freedom to develop their own identity and to excel, hopefully beyond, you know, what beyond your struggles. Okay, you want them to have a better life. Okay, how do you do this? Yeah, you do this by doing both, by like really working with both aspects of this, the freedom, but also the unfreedom, the love, and also the experience of unlove. Yeah, and also like the fact that there's truth out there, but also how to deal with untruths. These are all things that we have to consider as parents, how we want to convey them and how we want to train our kids. And obviously, we're not going to lecture a 5-year-old on the patterns and the fractals of the universe. Okay, we're just going to say, no, that's not a good choice, okay, because it hurts you or hurts somebody else, and that doesn't make you feel good. And so don't choose, these kind of things, make wiser choices. Yeah, and we help the kid to understand that if you do something, that causes suffering in somebody else, for example, or that causes suffering in yourself, that is not, something that leads you to growth. It is something that leads to trauma or to, all kinds of other struggles in life. Yeah, and so we can't just present sort of a world to our kids that has no struggles. We have to protect them to a certain degree from certain experiences until a certain stage of development, and then slowly introduce, these adversarial experiences and forces, and explain it and help, our children to understand them and share our wisdom. That's how we do this intuitively as humans. Okay. And if you take that image, okay, and you hold this in mind, that there is, this sort of parental, unconditional, love that supports, yeah, life and or human life in particular now, to evolve. All right. If you keep that in mind, okay, then we can begin to investigate, who are the parents here, yeah, and who are the children. Well, we are the children, okay, because clearly we still have a lot to learn. But who are the parents? Instead of just one quote unquote father, like most religions, or not most, but like how most of us were raised. Yeah, or is this just like one thing, like the source divine or something sort of really foggy out there somewhere that we don't quite know yet, and everybody has a different understanding of higher power, and some see it as a sort of a punitive and really strict sort of parent, and others see it as a very loving and very freedom giving parent, so that we can't really come to a consensus. But what I can share with you here at this point, since we're already 2 hours in and need to come to an end, is that there are indeed uh, several sort of parents and grandparents and so forth that are invested in our development. So God, okay, whatever God is, the highest sort of spiritual hierarchy that we can imagine, all right, indeed has, multiple, sort of sub-management levels, okay, that are responsible for certain stages of development of the universe, okay? So, it's quite, I want to say, logical actually to see it in this way, that, there's that there must be sort of different dimensions of everything, because, we already know that 3D, what we experience as our physical experience is a very limited, small fraction of a much larger reality. Okay, that there's maybe, sort of, certain management levels and directors and departments and so forth, yeah, that deal with certain levels of development, certain types of, teachers, if you will. Okay, so or schools, all right, that handle certain levels of reality. And Sheila, coming back to your question, if you then look at, ourselves, the human, okay, down here, sort of as the infant version, yeah, of, a whole entire sort of hierarchy of spirit beings or spiritual forces that operate in the universe on these multi-dimensional levels. Okay, then you could also think of it as like the next levels of development. In other words, for us human beings here, yeah, who are at seen from the spiritual science perspective on the, tenth, being the lowest level of the natural evolutionary process. Okay, we are here, to overcome all these struggles that come with the duality, guided by, and this is the sort of the next level of management, or the next level, like, if you will, the parental level, guided by angels. Yeah, called, the angeloi in Greek, because these concepts are very old. This is not something that is stemming from New Age, guys. The sort of fulfilling the function of the messengers of the divine spirit world, yeah, that help to guide human beings while in the earth plane. And these, angels, not the like sort of, I mean, they can be seen as winged beings by some people, but it's really a bit limited, to just think of them that way. You just have to understand that those are spirit beings that have already evolved, that have already graduated from being human, and are no longer need the physical experience. Yeah, they've already gone through it. But with them having gone through it already, they also have, still quite a bit of a vivid memory, of what it was like to be human, and therefore can muster all the compassion needed, to really guide a human through this physical experience. This is something that we practice in the Grace Soul self-initiation cycle here at transCODES. Is something that we practice in the Energy Training Club, yeah, via energy sessions, and also something that you can practice through the sacred self-healing meditations, because right, it's all coded in there, that we understand ourselves, on this learning path, into our next higher spiritual existence, which would be the existence of an angel. In other words, at some point of our human development, when we have, purified, refined, and healed, and ennobled, our spiritual identity, yeah, where we understand, what this human life is all about, and live our life accordingly, then we basically graduate into something, like, a being that can no longer materialize on earth, but can still, basically talk, yeah, to other humans. Yeah, and that's then the job that we do after, we're done here with this spiritual life. We become, with this physical life, we become spirit guides, for the humans, all right, that are in 3D. That's how far I want to go with this today, all right, and just hint at the 12 days of sacred self. There's 13 video series on my YouTube channel. Yeah, here just a copy of this. Okay, where I'm basically describing, these spiritual hierarchies through the eyes of, the the spiritual self awakening, and where I'm also offering a meditation or an alignment along with it that allows you to feel this. It's all about the inner experience of your higher self, and then slowly beginning to understand that there is so much more out there. So really just as a hint here, what this meaning of spiritual hierarchies is, all right. And if anything, I would suggest that we for now focus on, just the next evolutionary stage, Sheila. Okay, so that would be the next spiritual stage, knowing that there are many more stages there, and this is called differently in different spiritual traditions. Okay, so you'll find different words for this here. You will see things such as manas, okay, buddhi and atmas. Okay, these are all terms that are floating around that most people are really not trained to explain. Okay, they derive out of like 10,000 years culminated spiritual wisdom, and it is something that most spiritual teachings actually use as foundation. They just may call it differently. Okay, they may talk about, they may not call it manas, but they may call it something here like the um, forces of form, or the seraphim, or you have to be very specific when you use these terms and understand really how they relate within the spiritual hierarchies, to not become misleading. I've already pointed at that last time. Yeah, there's a certain level of spiritual awareness where you realize that all these words really have very specific meanings, and you shouldn't really be profaning them by just using them without knowing what they mean. And that is not like a warning or anything, but what it is really, is the realization that at some point of your spiritual journey, okay, when you have learned to overcome your unawareness, when you've learned to deal with all your psychological, sociological, emotional stuff like projection and delusions and so forth, escaping the Maya, the dream world, as you called it earlier, Julianne, when you've learned to actually, understand and control your own thinking, yeah, so that you can overcome things like mind control, manipulation, when you've learned to, really apply your spiritual will to things, yeah, where you no longer are subject to, say addictions or compulsions or seductions, okay, and you can will that, you can, like manifest this, what we earlier called the becoming the I. And when you've mastered really the power of your own alignment and what you tether yourself to, yeah, which forces you allow to work through you, and which forces, the light or the dark, that you're actually choosing when you're making certain choices. Yeah, so that's then, when you begin your spiritual identity journey. And then you'll begin to see, okay, there's another sort of journey that comes here, namely, you begin to understand the universe, or the world that you live in a much bigger sense. Yeah, your perspective has changed, and now your perception is changing. You're beginning to develop, new senses, new spiritual organs, and you then have to kind of go back to the basics and study things differently. And that's, here something that we will discuss in part 5, namely the different stages of developing your spiritual identity. Yeah, what happens, what is necessary at certain stages for you to further evolve. You can already see this here. You know, there are certain things that need to be developed in order to, you know, more or less complete the learning. Yeah, and this doesn't necessarily happen in this order. So never take any of these 2D diagrams that I create here, you know, in the way that you would take a business diagram or something like that. Those aren't linear. They do not happen one after the other. They often happen simultaneously. They often also can occur out of order, yeah, in a different order. So never take this all just you know, in this 2 or 3D sense, but understand that we're now dealing with multiple dimensions of yourself, where on that exist simultaneously, and that need to be addressed, refined, healed, and purified one by one, you know, at some stage of your journey. So the topics for our next part then will be those topics to go a little bit further into, you know, the aligning and tethering and how that actually occurs, so that we get a little bit of feeling for, you know, this spiritual will that I mentioned. Okay, so how to develop our spiritual will. We'll talk a little bit more about light and dark forces, yeah, and how they work through us, and how we can identify them, and how we can learn, you know, to master that. So we'll go through all these different stages here, and we'll encounter different spiritual concepts as we go. Yeah, that we have already discussed, that we will now bring back in context with this a journey of developing your spiritual eye, yeah, your soul identity. Okay. Yeah, so really cool discussions here. I'm super grateful for your guys' questions and for your sharing. As I mentioned in the beginning, I want to encourage you to keep asking questions, to you know, not hesitate, you know, to bring in your own renderings, any type of or any attempt, you know, of articulating, you know, what you're feeling, what your instinct is telling you, and sort of how you understand things, is, you know, a very, very valuable contribution here, because not only are you going through, you know, something that would then ultimately lead to your spiritual organs further refining and developing, you're also helping others along the way. This is super, super important to recognize, and is really the core lesson of our spiritual journey, namely that we're not alone, okay, that we are connected with all that were on this journey before us, and all those who will be on the journey after us, you know, pertaining this particular lifetime, maybe even ourselves in a different lifetime, and that everything that we put out there really impacts, you know, the overall consciousness of humanity. So the more, guys, the more we talk about this, the more we contemplate, the more we you know, get used to shifting our perspective, opening up our perception, you know, tuning into our feelings, tuning into, you know, what we're actually thinking, what we're actually feeling, what we're actually choosing. All right, the more refined your spiritual idea, your spiritual identity becomes. Yeah, the more supported, you know, you are by these forces of light, that whose sole job it is to help you along the way. How do they help us along the way? They help us through, on one hand, non-interference, so they cannot interfere with your free will. They can, however, you know, whisper to you, they can guide you, they can show you things, okay, in your inner mind's eye, in your body, in your feelings through, your spiritual senses. So the more you develop your spiritual senses, the more you will also then experience the presence of these forces of light, and along with that, also the presence of the forces of the dark, or the adversarial forces. Okay, and that's then subject of part 5 as well. How to juggle that, and what the lesson is. Yeah, why does darkness exist? Yeah, if God created all, did He also create darkness? And if so, for what purpose? Yeah, I hope that you write down everything that comes up as we go, with, perhaps question marks on certain things that you want to clarify. Yeah, so please ask if there is something that, maybe creates a contradiction in you, or brings up more questions, or, perhaps also different views from different perspectives, different spiritual or esoteric teachings. Okay, all that is welcome here in this discussion. Okay, guys. I hope that this type of discussion, this type of conversation, is assisting you in your journey, is helping you to just simply train your perception. You don't have to agree with anything. You should not just blindly agree with everything. You should think it for yourself. You should feel it for yourself, so that you can fully own it, so that you can fully integrate it within yourself. Yeah, that's the goal. The goal is for you to, choosing the light, not just doing what other people tell you to do, but, to actually wanting to choose the light. Yeah, the wanting to love the light. Not just to say, oh yeah, of course I choose the light, but then, not actually understanding what it entails, but to fully unconsciously wanting to evolve, wanting to grow in your spiritual being. I see you again in 2 weeks for the parallel workshop series, Issues with Perception, in which we will cover our senses, our spiritual senses, and with it also the evolution of our spiritual organs. Something that we do in an experimental or empiric way throughout the months with our energy sessions, because those are all things that have to be experienced. This is not just, it is not possible to integrate all this with just hearing it, or thinking about it, or through it in an intellectual sense. You actually have to develop your own inner feeling for that, because that is the language of your soul. The language of your soul is the feeling. Yeah, all these things that you so wonderfully described here throughout the workshop. So thank you for showing up with your soul and your body here, and I'm looking forward to our next workshop. Everyone.